His cat, Mittens, was acting strange, and Ben wasn't sure what was going on. There had been no movement for days as she stared in awe at the oven. A strange thing was going on, and Ben knew something wasn't right. The mystery of what his cat was looking at prompted him to investigate. After getting on all fours, he couldn't believe the discovery he made with Mittens. A few months after moving into his grandmother's house with his family, he was unprepared for what he found. Having just inherited it, Ben saw it as the ideal way to launch a new chapter. In spite of the house's age and need for repair, Ben and his wife Macy were willing to take on the challenge. In addition to a lot of furniture left behind, Grandma's trusty old stove caused most of the family's problems. Macy and Ben moved their family from Boston to Rhode Island. He was shocked to find out he was mentioned in her will. While he loved his grandmother, he did not expect to inherit her home. Because their sons would finally be able to have their own rooms, Braden and Camden were especially excited to move. Having grown up in the house, Ben was delighted to be back. Having sat empty for years, it was time to rewire the whole place since the wiring was old. As he looked around the kitchen, he was surprised to see his grandmother's old stove still intact. She told him it had stopped working when he was a child. When she got a new stove, she kept the old stove next to it because she loved it so much. Mittens, the family's cat, took initiative to explore their new home as the family settled into their new home. The spaciousness of the house immediately drew her attention. In no time at all, Mittens began acting strangely. The way she behaved in the kitchen was especially unusual. The first one to notice was Ben. He was a big fan of cats and spoilt Mittens beyond belief. He became concerned when she started acting strangely. He walked into the kitchen, and she meowed nonstop trying to get his attention. Could she be hungry? Ben noticed another thing, though. The old stove from Ben's grandmother was a keepsake he wanted to keep, since they renovated the kitchen. In view of how much Grandma loved it, he couldn't easily throw it away. Her favorite spot was in front of the old stove, and she would stare at the oven for hours on end. He could have sworn the cat was acting like his grandmother. She sat in front of it while her bread was baking. The man couldn't understand why Mittens loved sitting by the oven so much. After a while, Ben began to become increasingly concerned about it. There may be a need for him to take her to the vet. Perhaps she was showing him something that indicated she wasn't feeling well. In an effort to avoid any more risks, Ben called the veterinarian right away to schedule an appointment. Upon finishing a thorough examination of Mittens, the vet delivered an unexpected report to Ben. Mittens was in perfect health. She was in no need of any medical care. Although Ben appreciated the glowing report, he was unable to understand what she was doing. Mittens wanted to tell him something, but what? The thought agonized him. Despite Mittens' obsession with the oven, he could still see that his tuxedo tabby was in good health overall. She played with Ben and the kids as usual, but as soon as Ben went to the kitchen, she would run ahead of him to look at the oven. As a result, Ben was convinced that Mittens was trying to communicate with him. Did she not like the food she was eating? Besides establishing that she was physically fine, maybe he can change her food and see what she likes. However, it did not yield any results. In spite of Mittens' aversion to new food, she continued to annoy Ben with her constant mewing and moaning. Did he miss something? There was something strange about this. Ben couldn't stand seeing Mittens in such a frenzy, and something was troubling her. Whenever she wasn't in the kitchen, she was attempting to lure them into it. Moreover, Macy and the boys couldn't understand Mittens' constant meowing. While trying to figure out Mittens' problem, the family was at a loss. It consumed their minds every day and night. Ben sauntered into the kitchen one day with Mittens right behind him, meowing like crazy. The first time she touched the oven was when she put her paws up. It sparked Ben's interest. This signaled to him that she wanted him to open the oven. Kneeling, he opened the oven door as Mittens stood beside him. What was he about to see? Immediately, Mittens jumped in and began to sniff the oven. She smelled something, but what was it? Were they remnants of Grandma's baking? It wasn't clear to Ben, but she seemed satisfied just to sniff about. As far as Ben was concerned, she was free to do what she wanted. Her anxiety seemed to have been calmed by it. The Mittens mystery might have just been solved by him. He thought that at least. With each passing day, Mittens became calmer. In the meantime, she was eating and playing as usual without trying to get their attention. However, something changed after that. On one night, Ben vividly remembers hearing a noise coming from the kitchen. Grabbing a baseball bat, he raced down the stairs. If anyone attempted to break into his house, he would swing at them. The kitchen was definitely making noises, and his heart raced. Things seemed to be moving around. His knuckles were white from gripping the bat so tightly. In defense of his family, he was ready. In anticipation, he waited, but nothing happened. Upon entering the kitchen, he switched on the light. As usual, Mittens was seated in front of the oven. Angry and furious, Mittens clawed at Ben and the oven. It was her attempt to capture his attention once again. Her rage must have been triggered by something in this kitchen. The question is, what? Neither shattered glass nor broken door locks indicated that a break-in had taken place. It was all in place. In an attempt to understand Mittens, he racked his brains until he finally saw it. It wasn't clear why, but Grandma's stove was skewed. The furniture had been moved. In the past, he could have sworn it was straightened and in its proper place. Having stood there for decades, he was certain that the oven had welded itself to the wall. However, Mittens clawed at him as soon as he saw his reaction. Could she be telling him that he was on the right track? Although he wasn't sure what it was, he moved the old stove just to appease Mittens. Despite its weight, it became easier to move once it was swung out. On the floor, he noticed several scuffs and marks. Moving this stove seemed to be a common occurrence. There was something behind it, wasn't there? As he moved it out, he saw something that he couldn't believe. Now he knew why Mittens spent all these weeks staring at the oven. The wall behind the stove had an opening. Despite being covered by a board, it appeared to lead to the basement. After finding out what had been going on in his house, Ben became concerned. Ben's mind was blown. Despite his best efforts, he could not figure out why the kitchen wall had such a large hole. Mittens purred as she rubbed her body against his. It was obvious that she was happy the mystery had been solved. As Ben praised Mittens, he wondered what was happening. His curiosity got the better of him, so he decided to investigate. The staircase led down to a damp, dark basement. There were cobwebs covering the walls. It looked as though no one had been down there in a long time. During his exploration, he discovered a renovated small room in the basement corner. The house was not empty. Ben and his family were clearly not alone. Some canned goods, blankets, a pillow, and a small table with a lamp were also found. It was confusing and frightening for Ben. What kind of people lived down here? He was curious about someone living here without their knowledge. However, he soon realized that things might not go well for them. It was time for him to go back upstairs and call the police. Just like Ben, the police were surprised when they arrived. Going down to the basement, they decided to investigate further. There were a few personal belongings as well as a small, makeshift bed. Somebody must have been living down there for a long time. The neighbors never reported any disturbances. There was no sign of the stranger in the house after the police searched it thoroughly. Even after searching the surrounding area, they couldn't find anyone. The person must have fled when they heard the police were approaching. The unease was beginning to creep into Ben's family. Who lived in this person's basement, and why did they do so? There was another disturbing aspect to the story as well. Several of the items that Ben and Macy could see down there belonged to them. There was a mysterious disappearance of some food items. Macy had also noticed the disappearance of her favorite blanket. The items were all found in the basement. It was indeed someone who had been stealing from them. There was still one mystery Macy needed to solve when she thought of someone being in their house. It started to feel uneasy for Ben and Macy. The feeling that they were being watched couldn't be shaken. Making sure the windows and doors were locked, they kept checking them. Such an event happened right under their noses, and it was unbelievable. Despite their best efforts, they were getting worn down by the situation. A thorough search of the area was conducted by the police. It was clear from this person's actions that they were not amateurs. The ability to maneuver in and out of view without making a sound or being caught was very difficult. There was now a great deal of concern between Ben and Macy. Taking the makeshift dwelling out of their house was what they wanted. Nevertheless, the cops made a breakthrough discovery. A hidden entry behind the stove was used by the stranger to enter and exit the basement. According to the police, their backdoor key allowed them to enter and exit freely. Despite not knowing who the person was, they knew they had to find them before they did any damage. It was a difficult night for Ben to sleep that night. He had caked the stench of the hole on his fingertips. He had a vivid memory of its gunky walls. Hopefully, the mammal lurking in the hole would be harmless and easy to remove with pest control's assistance. To take a closer look at the hole in the morning, he decided to wait until morning. His projections of the night would not match the reality. It happened around 1:30. Despite the rain outside, Ben had just turned up the heat in the house to stay warm. Mittens meowed on his feet as he was preparing to go to bed. When she wanted food or petting, she used to snuggle up to him. Something else was going on here. Despite Ben's best efforts, Mittens kept meowing at him. The sound of her meows was painful, as if she were in a hurry. Ben felt tense amidst the pounding rain and darkness inside the house. In the distance, Mittens had taken a step away from him, stopped, and stared anxiously at him. Until Ben realized what she was doing, she kept meowing and moving. As realization dawned on Ben, he whispered, "The kitchen." Mittens needed to show him something, but time was running out. It wasn't Mike who turned on the lights. It was only after following the cat into the dark kitchen that he realized what was going on. A snarl escaped Mittens' mouth as she approached the door. Ben saw it at that moment. A heavy table had been pushed to the side of the oven door that he had placed in front of the door. However, that was only half of the story. There was something moving in the darkness. The growl from Mittens' mouth made Ben step back, as if he were trying to escape. His blood ran cold as he caught sight of something in the kitchen's swimming darkness. There was some doubt in Ben's mind about what he saw. His heart raced as adrenaline rushed through him as he flashed his light toward it. There was something rushing past the table and into the open oven. Despite what he thought, it wasn't a tiny mammal. The size and ferocity of this were far greater. The situation was much more dangerous. Ben only caught a glimpse of a black and yellow pattern, which sheened as it zoomed past his eyes into the darkness of the oven. It was difficult for even the flashlight on his phone to capture what he had seen. His body was frozen in place by the cold. As he took another step back, he used everything he had within him. The family had to leave the house as soon as possible. After turning on his heels, Ben ran to the room where his kids were sleeping. Their beds were made over with sweaters and rain jackets, and he asked them to get dressed. His eyes darted to Macy's bedroom, telling her they should leave immediately. "Why, what's going on?" Macy asked. Ben was unable to put into words what he had seen. His only concern was the safety of his family. In the garage, he led Macy and Mittens, carrying their son and bags, to their vehicle while carrying his daughter and bags. He strapped his daughter in, but she pointed to the wall as he did so. Seeing the wall, Ben's breath hitched. Moving towards the car in the dark, something grew closer to the wall. In a flash, Ben was in the driver's seat. Despite the rain-soaked driveway, he sped down the road before the garage door had fully opened. Macy had already contacted the authorities and explained that there was something in their house. Her eyes caught a glimpse of a shadow returning to the garage's darkness. Immediately after dropping his family off at a nearby hotel, Ben headed to the police station. It didn't take him long to explain what had happened to the authorities. There was still some doubt in his mind as to whether what he had seen crawling back into the oven and in the garage was a man or an animal. It wasn't worth taking a chance. A few officers accompanied him back to his house, ready to begin investigating. Some 50 minutes later, his garage door was still ajar. It was now no longer raining, and the wind howled ominously. Unlike the other houses in the neighborhood, Ben's house stood out from the rest. As Ben walked in, 2 officers stood beside him. In response to his explanation of what he saw in the kitchen and garage, the officers assured him he was not in danger. His family home, however, was here. Something or someone living here, too, grumbled in his stomach. Their findings would result in the entire house being quarantined. In addition to his weapon, One of the officers had a flashlight to light the way. A wide berth was given to him by the rest of his team, including Ben, as he entered the kitchen. There was a snarl. A hiss echoed through the corridor as the officer stepped back. "Everybody out now," he whispered while taking steps back. No sudden movements. In the living room, he was asked, "What did you see?" "We need to get animal control here now," the officer said. Even though it was ice cold outside, he had wide eyes and a sweaty forehead. "Why?" Ben asked. "Why do we need to call animal control?" During the officer's explanation, the couch moved. It drew everyone's attention, and their lights were flashed toward it. "Please tell me you see that," Ben whispered. The cushions were being moved up and down by something inside the couch. It was a big shake that shook the whole sofa. An officer pointed at the kitchen door and said, "I think there's more than one of them," as a scaly tail disappeared into the couch.